on the cultivation front, like this literally is the most important room. You know, a lot of people say the flower room, and it's all important. But if you don't have a healthy start to the plant's life cycle, you're going to run into problems later in later phases of the process. So in here, these are all of our different strains that we carry. These are called mother plants, and so basically we're using these in order to propagate more plants for production. Like I said, it's very, very important that these plants are super healthy. We also rotate our mother plants. If you continuously take cuttings from a mother plant, eventually you may get some genetic drift if you don't cycle through them. So generally speaking, we cycle them about every 3 months. And that just really kind of helps maintain their health and make sure that the genetic isn't changing from the original genetic. So if you notice in here, it's a little more humid. Depending on the life cycle where we are, this is considered a vegetative state right now that these plants are in. So if you notice, there's no buds on these, and that really is all about the light cycle. And so in here, we do an 18-6, so 18 hours of light, 6 hours of dark. That keeps it in a vegetative state so that we can grow a plant potentially. Now that one back there is a lot bigger than we typically do. That one's been around for a while, which we typically don't grow them up that big. But as long as you keep to that light cycle, you could run 24-hour light cycle as well. It's really not until you hit 12 hours of light and 12 hours of dark that the plant is now going to start flowering, okay, which we'll see in our flower room. Currently, we're growing in cocoa. So this is a ground up cocoa core. It's just an inert material. If you guys go into other grows, there's literally a million different ways to do this. So this is just kind of how we initially got started. We are at some point going to move to soil. In cannabis, we call it living soil, but it's soil. We're going to actually start that process of transitioning here very, very soon. So technically, we're growing hydroponically. By definition, anytime regardless of the medium, anytime you're bringing the nutrients via irrigation, by definition, that's hydroponics. A lot of people think of hydroponics, they think of, they really automatically kind of think of something called deep water culture, where the roots are actually in the water at all times. That's a form of hydroponic growing, but really anytime you're bringing the nutrients via irrigation is considered hydroponic. So. And if you're not growing hydroponically, then you're growing in soil, which is a different process. But I think there are some advantages to it, and that's why we're going to make the change to it. So from here, from the mother plants, and this is Eric. He's been with me here how many years now? 6 years. So he's a veteran, and he primarily runs this room in our bedroom. And basically, his responsibility is keeping this as clean as possible. And he'll be the one that actually does the cutting. So every time once you get it on this train, it doesn't stop. So every week we're taking cuttings and we're moving plants, and hopefully it doesn't stop. So as I mentioned before, there's literally a million different ways you can do this. We've just kind of started with aeroponic cloning. I mean, we just have a lot of success with it. But you can do it in rock wool cubes. You can do it in all kinds of various things, and it's really just up to the grower to what their preference is. We've had a lot of luck. I mean, we get pretty much almost 100% propagation rate with doing it this way. So, there's advantages and disadvantages to everything, but we've had a lot of luck to this. And I do like the idea when we do go to soil that we're not mixing mediums at all. So we'll be able to put this directly into soil as opposed to putting in a rock wool cube and then putting a rock wool. People do that, and it's fine, but generally speaking, when we're transitioning plants from various stages, whether it's from propagation to veg to flower, the less stress that we can put on the plants during those different phases, the better. Because then the plants are really focused on growing and doing what we want them to do as opposed to trying to heal themselves. Alrighty, so this is our veg room. We're still really in our infancy here at Ancient Roots. With adult use, we're going to be able to scale up, and we're, getting ready to hopefully start that process. But again, this is still in a vegetative cycle. This is just giving the plants an opportunity to go from the propagation stage, and then obviously these are kind of the earlier plants that we probably just put in here this week.
Right.
And you know, like I said, everybody does a little bit differently. I think on average, we're vegging for about 3 to 4-ish weeks. Yeah. And you know, it really kind of just depends on, you know, the style that you're growing. I mean, you could literally not even veg. I mean, some people just skip veg and go straight into flower. We've never really done that, but it's really up to you know, the particular, you know, cultivator on, you know, how long they want to veg their plants. And really, it's just a matter of how large do you want the plants going into the next, you know, into the flower. And we switched over to these cocoa. They're pre-filled bags, so saves a little bit on labor. Once we get a living soil, then we'll probably have to get back to you know, filling them. But for now, these come just like this, and it's just a lot easier. It saves a little bit of time. But in here, it's, you know, it's very similar environment. Again, it's still in the vegetative stage, so the light cycle is still 18 hours of light, 6 hours of dark for us. And that's, you know, probably one of the more important things is having, you know, complete control of your environmentals. You know, if I had to pick, you know, what's the most important thing with cultivation, then I mean, there's probably an argument for genetics, you know, because that makes a huge difference as well. But next is having complete control over your environments to really grow premium cannabis. That's critical. And so right behind Eric, there's something called a VPD chart. And so, you know, depending on the stage of the plant, you know, the percentage of the temperature and the humidity percent, the tolerances kind of can change. Yeah. And so when it's in a vegetative state, you can get away generally with a little higher humidity. Once we get it into flower, then generally we try to, you know, get more of a, you know, lower humidity environment. But that's a nice little cheat sheet to kind of help the guys make sure that we're staying in the, you know, in the ranges that we really want to. So if you notice, you'll see all those tags in each individual plant. Those are we call metric tags. That's kind of the state system, as you're aware of. You got them too. And, you know, we have to track everything from day one all the way up until, you know, we get it off to the dispensaries with you guys. So everything is traceable and tracked. Cool. So this is just kind of our general production area. These guys are doing a harvest right now. And so this particular harvest is actually for our fresh frozen. So this is going to go, I don't really like calling it our lab. I prefer to use the term studio because hash making literally is an art. And we don't use any chemicals in the process, which we'll show you here in a little bit. But basically, as opposed to drying and hanging these for, you know, dried flower, we're going to freeze these immediately once they get bucked down. This is referring to as bucked down. So they're, you know, removing some of the fan leaves and really kind of cutting out the buds. And then this will, again, be frozen. Yep. So in here, you know, this is considered our flowering room. And so, as I mentioned before, probably the biggest difference in here is the climate in comparison to the other rooms, but most importantly, it's the light cycle. So right now, you know, these are 12 hours of dark, 12 hours of light. You know, commercial growing can be a little bit tricky. You know, there's, you know, obviously a lot of pressure to try to get as many harvests as you can. And so, you know, we originally tried to grow everything within an 8-week time frame. And that's kind of the, you know, I would probably say somewhat industry standard. And that's cultivar specific. There are some cultivars that will finish in 8 weeks effectively. We just had a hard time really finding ones that finish the way that we really would want to finish. So we have moved to a 9-week flowering cycle, which not too many commercial grows do. And, you know, but we're definitely more on the craft side, I think, of the spectrum. And so, you know, we ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, we're motivated by the patient experience, and we want to provide the patient with best product we possibly can. And if that means an extra week of flower time, which means ultimately less churns, so be it. So right now, as you can see, they harvested this table yesterday, and they're harvesting these plants for hash. I think one of the more important things that gets somewhat overlooked is the importance of being single source when you're in the solventless space. So we are actually growing specific strains that are specifically grown for hash. And for some of the processors that don't have their own cultivation, they're just sourcing flower. And obviously it might be good for hash, it might not be good for hash, just kind of depending on what they can get. Now, some have arrangements where they're definitely probably growing for hash and it's getting processed, but by and large, having control over the flower that ultimately gets used for our hash is a big advantage for sure. So this is OGKB times Froyo. Okay, so a lot of the cultivars that we actually grow specific for hash, a lot of times the bud size can be somewhat irrelevant. I don't want to say that it doesn't impact how much, but the biggest thing that we're looking at is how well it basically washes. So when we do wash it, we need it to dump as many trichomes as we possibly can to make it worthwhile. And so there's certain cultivars that we grow that have nice big buds, and then for hash sometimes that they just don't, but they have a lot of trichomes. And so it's I think there's things that we're constantly striving to increase yields. I mean, I think any cultivator, that's just a goal that you have to kind of look at. But at the same time, you don't want to compromise quality to be able to do that. So there's just certain strains that bulk up a little bit more than others. But at the end of the day, when it comes to hash making, the only thing that really kind of matters is how well it dumps. Yeah. So. Now, we like to keep this as dark. We don't like to have a lot of activity in here. Yeah. So, one of the preventative things, so you don't run into issues, is while the plant's living, it has a lot of natural defenses and things. But once you chop it down, it's a little bit more susceptible thing. So, we really try not to, be in this room a whole lot. But we can kind of take a peek. We try to keep it dark and very cool and low humidity. But basically, you're hanging them upside down, kind of like tobacco, I guess. And these will stay in here for probably kind of varies, but probably somewhere in the 10 to 14 day range. You don't want to rush this process. I mean, you literally can do everything right all the way up to this point, and if you don't have the post-harvest down, you can literally ruin the product. And typically it gets ruined because you're trying to rush the process. And so slowly drying it out and curing it over time, it literally can make or break your batch. So as I mentioned before, a lot of people call this a lab, which I'll still refer to as a lab, but I really do kind of look this as a studio. Hash making is absolutely an art. And we have some very talented artisans that produce our hash and live rosin products. And I'd say probably the thing that I love most about entering into this place is that there are no signs that say caution, high explosive, chemicals, nothing. This is completely solvent-free process, which is incredibly important, especially when we're talking about medicine, obviously. The difference with a live product, right? So whether it's live rosin or live resin, the live part just means that it's from fresh frozen. So they took it from harvest and freezing it immediately. And basically what that does is it halts the natural metabolic degradation that can happen when you're drying and curing. It's just a natural process that happens. And by freezing it, you're stopping that natural metabolic state. So it's, I tell people all the time, solventless products, hash, live rosin, is literally the closest thing that you're going to do to taking a bud off a living plant and consuming it. But you'll immediately smell the difference when you smell live rosin versus dry flower. Right. It's just literally night and day. So in here is our wash room. We keep this cold. Basically, the process is, we'll take that frozen material and we'll put it in basically a washer, and with ice and water. So ice and water essentially is the solvent. And basically what that's doing is it's freezing the trichomes to allow that agitation that happens with the washing to break the trichomes off of the stalk. And then basically we'll collect that. And the very first product that we actually get from that is bubble hash or ice water hash, which is a product in itself. We have put out full melt ice water hash before, but the difficulty with that is that it's not stable at room temperature. And so even at room temperature, it can start greasing up. And so logistically, it's difficult. And Ohio, unfortunately, on the med side, had kind of a rule where refrigeration wasn't allowed. I think it has more to do with edibles that they didn't want to have anything to deal with. But I think some interpreted that as just can't have it at all. Because ideally, when you're dealing with a full melt ice water hash, you literally got to keep it cold all the way through. So we delivered on dry ice, and then it goes immediately into ideally a freezer, but refrigeration generally would be fine as well. So I am happy to announce that we have a batch of fresh press coming out. And maybe we can take a peek at that. But that is a little bit different. So from there, again, we'll produce the bubble hash or ice water hash. And when it first comes out, it literally just looks like a white, wet sand. There's several things that you can do with your trim or your biomass. We were selling kief for a while, and we recently just kind of decided to start washing and pressing it out as well. Generally speaking, it's a little bit more of an inferior product, but we're going to start I guess a less expensive option for edibles with it, basically. And so still very potent, still full spectrum, but probably not quite on the same level as a live product, but still a very, very good and desirable product at a better price point, basically. Yeah. So right now it kind of looks all solid. Nick will basically break this up, and it literally will just be more like a sand kind of consistency. Yeah, powdery. Oh, sorry, this hasn't chunked up. So yeah, that's basically ice water hash or bubble. Well, technically bubble hash. I think really, as I mentioned kind of before, is we really want to truly be, the alternative to traditional medicines, pharmaceuticals, highly processed products. And so, and we want to represent cannabis, in its purest form, which is why, we're 100% solventless. We're very meticulous about what we put out as a product. And, you can't, the one thing with the cannabis industry is you really can't fake it. It's something that you've got to be very passionate about, I think, in order to really kind of put out the type of products. And I think everyone here, my team that I've assembled, and are all incredibly passionate about cannabis in general, but also, cannabis as medicine. They understand the importance of cannabis as medicine, and they understand the importance of putting out a quality, product. And so I would say, we try to represent cannabis as best as we can, is the best way that I would see it. But, overall, it is definitely to put out the best products that we possibly can. I'm not going to claim that they're the best products, that are out there in general, but by and large, we try to be as consistent as we can, and try to put out the best product that we possibly can. Well, right now, as far as on the processing side, besides the flower, we are 100% solventless. So basically, all of our products start out with, well, not all of them now. We are going to start getting into flower rosin or hash rosin, but by and large, the bulk of our portfolio is from live, living, fresh frozen starter material. And so, with that though, we have quite a few different SKUs. So, we've got the different batter forms. As I mentioned, we're going to be coming out with some fresh press here shortly. We'll try to do, a full melt ice water hash as the rec space kind of grows and there's more refrigeration options at the dispensary level, we'll continue to put out those types of products. We've got different vape products. As I mentioned, we've got the Dablicator as well. And then on the edible front, we've got a couple various options there with capsules and gummies and honey as well. And so, but yeah, eventually, now that it is adult use, it was really important for me, as I mentioned, especially while we were strictly just a medical state, it was really important for me to really kind of look at this as truly as medicine. And so it was important to me to just completely take off the table any chance of residual solvents being in the product. It's hard for me to say, right now we've scaled back a little bit. At one point, I think we had, probably close to 24 employees. So certainly there's some revenue coming in from that. And we are going to scale. So we are bringing jobs, into Wilmington. So, I would love to think that we played a part. We promote Wilmington as much as we can. I think literally on every package, we say, handcrafted, cultivated, whatever the case might be, in Wilmington, Ohio. So hopefully, we're representing Wilmington in a positive way. And at the end of the day, hopefully, we are making a difference within the community. Yeah, so I mean that really just kind of comes down to your processes, right? We our what we call our SOPs or our standard operating procedures. I'm very strict about that. We've established certain things that overall we kind of feel is the best to put out the best product possible. And I think my employees are pretty understanding that the expectation is that they follow to a T, and we don't cut corners. And so it's taken me a while to get to the team that we're currently at. And like I said, their passion for cannabis it's infectious, and it really, the culture here is really, I think, the type of culture that you want. And everybody is on the same page. Everybody understands the processes and the expectations, and they're high. I think the most important thing within cannabis, as far as from a consistency standpoint, is the quality. But yeah, I think it really kind of comes down to the culture, and then your product mix, and the types of products that you're putting out, and then the devices that you're ultimately using as well. We want to give patients the best possible way of dosing it so that it is effective each time. And I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to focus on the patient experience. The patient experience is something that we have focused on all the way, whether it is higher end packaging, whether it's doing the little extra things. We were the first ones to put boost packs in our flower containers, and we only did that to maintain all the hard work that my team did. We'll go the extra mile to make sure that the patients have the best experience possible. And if you look at some of the more successful companies that have been, out there, I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs, and that was his mantra: is user experience, consumer experience, and that is really, I don't want to say that's what we're solely focused on, but that is primarily, what drives us. Yeah, I think one of the more difficult things, really potentially in any market, but any market that is really new, and it really kind of hasn't worked itself out yet. There's just so many unknowns, and as a business, that can be literally, almost impossible to really figure out. Whether it's going to be legislative changes within the state, whether there's going to be some federal changes. Cannabis is difficult. Like, a lot of people don't realize that we get taxed completely different on the federal level than any other business. And we fall under a tax code that's called 280E, which limits us to only writing off our cost of goods sold. So all the materials that we use specifically just to producing the product is all that we can write off on our federal taxes. Any other business, for the most part, can write off anything. So these paper clips, all this stuff up here that is necessary for any business to function, we can't write off. So our federal tax rate is much, much higher than any other industry out there. And, it's highly regulated, so you've got a lot of rules. There's a lot of things that, we have to do to follow those rules that aren't always in the best interest of, the business, so it can be very, very difficult. So, you like, I think the biggest thing is just live in the now. You need to plan for the future with the knowns, with the things that you do know. But I think it's just, again, it comes down to, trying to be innovative, try to be in the forefront of kind of the next thing. What happens on a federal level, whether it's rescheduling or anything else, we'll just kind of wait and see what happens. I don't wake up. I wake up every day and I operate in the now. With certain people, when they think of cannabis, they, I think they just kind of have this automatic, like, we're growing like in a basement and it's dirty and filthy, and I don't know, there just seems to be a misconception about the whole process for some people, and the cleanliness that this occurs, and the professionalism from people that are involved in the industry, whether it's on the cultivation, processing, or the retail side. There's just we all take it very, very seriously. And so I think that surprises a lot of people, or most do. Now, obviously there's outliers, right? But I think by and far, the people that gravitate towards this industry, believe in cannabis on a level that, honestly, a lot of consumer products, I mean, they just don't elicit the passion that cannabis can. And that's incredibly important. As I said, when you're building your team, you have to find like-minded people that have the same goal of putting out the highest quality product. And I would say that's probably the biggest thing. And there certainly are, in certain markets, there are dispensaries that are probably stereotypical, where it's like in a trailer on the side of the road, and it's just goofy and weird. But by and large, I think people are shocked at the cleanliness, and a lot of people refer to these as like Apple stores. You know what I mean? They're just very, very high-end retail kind of spaces, and so I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I find, is that people just kind of assume it's still kind of more of a black market kind of situation, and when they come in here or they go to a retail or whatever, they're usually pretty shocked. Yeah, I mean, they're I mean, it's very, very professional. And I think that for a lot of people that aren't used to cannabis, they just kind of know the black market stuff and probably, what kind of goes on there. But once they're kind of exposed to the legal market, certain legal markets, that's, I would say, probably the biggest thing that I run into. I think education is just key, and breaking stereotypes and acceptance. And the acceptance, again, we're kind of at a crossroads here, and it's, we can continue to try to, battle misconceptions about the plant, whether, whether people think it's a gateway drug or, whatever the case might be. It's like, we're past that, and I don't know if, we faced this when, with alcohol, when it, became legal again. Yeah, I mean, education is kind of critical with it. But the reality is, whether you're against it or not, there is cannabis in your community at levels never seen before. And so really the only way, again, even if you're against it, the only way we're going to get a handle on it, on the black market that, is selling potential products that aren't, up to the same standards. I mean, obviously, I think having a highly regulated and tested, and child-resistant packaging is ultimately the best way to go.
I want to thank David and Ancient Roots for this inside look into their amazing facility. I had a lot of fun putting this project together, and hope I get more opportunities in the future.